The space mission, a mission to explore space. It was a bright morning when the team of astronauts gathered at the space station. The air was filled with excitement and nerves. This was no ordinary day. Today, they were going to space. The mission was to explore a faraway planet that no one had ever visited before. The team had spent years training for this. They had learned about flying a spaceship, living in space, and working together as a team. The leader of the team was Captain John. He was brave, strong, and very smart. He had been to space before, but this time was special. This was the first time humans would travel so far from Earth. With him were 3 other astronauts, Maria, a scientist who loved to learn about new planets, Tom, an engineer who could fix anything, and Emma, a doctor who made sure everyone stayed healthy. Their spaceship, the Explorer was ready for launch. It stood tall, shining under the bright sun. Inside the spaceship, there were computers, equipment, and everything they would need for their long trip. The astronauts put on their special space suits. These suits would keep them safe from the dangers of space, like the cold and lack of air. The time had come. Captain John gave a nod to the team, and everyone took their seats inside the spaceship. They fastened their seat belts and waited. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The sound of the engine starting filled the air. 3, 2, 1, liftoff. With a loud roar, the spaceship rose from the ground, leaving Earth behind. The astronauts felt the force push them back into their seats as the spaceship sped up, flying higher and higher. Soon, the blue sky turned dark, and they could see the stars. It was beautiful. Space was calm and quiet, with no sound at all. The astronauts looked out of the windows in awe. They could see Earth below them, a small, round ball covered in blue oceans and green land. As they traveled deeper into space, the astronauts worked hard. Maria was busy studying the maps of the stars and planets. She used a special computer to make sure they were going in the right direction. Tom checked the engines and made sure everything was working perfectly. Emma kept an eye on everyone's health, making sure they were eating well and staying strong. Captain John was always watching the controls, steering the ship through the stars. After many hours, they finally reached their first stop, the moon. The astronauts had been here before, but it was always amazing to see. The moon was big and gray, with craters all over its surface. Captain John guided the ship close to the moon, and they floated above it, looking down. The moon was silent, with no life on it. It was a lonely place, but it was also peaceful. Next stop, said Captain John, Mars. Mars was a red planet, much farther away. It would take them a few days to get there, so the team settled in for the long journey. The first night in space was strange. The astronauts floated in their sleeping bags because there was no gravity in space. They had to be careful with everything they did. Eating, drinking, even brushing their teeth was different. Water floated in the air, and they had to use special bags for their food. As the days passed, the team grew closer. They worked together, laughed together, and sometimes they even missed home together. It was hard being away from Earth, but they knew they were doing something amazing. Then something happened. One morning, as Tom was checking the spaceship, he noticed a problem. "Captain, we have a small leak," he said. A leak in space could be dangerous because the air inside the ship could escape. If they didn't fix it quickly, they might lose all their air. Captain John remained calm. "Tom, can you fix it?" he asked. Tom grabbed his tools and went to work. The others watched closely as Tom worked fast, checking every part of the spaceship. Time was running out. The leak was small, but in space, even a small problem could become a big one. After what felt like hours, Tom finally smiled. "I fixed it," he said. Everyone cheered. The ship was safe again. Captain John praised Tom for his quick thinking and hard work. "You saved us," he said. The team continued on their journey, knowing they could trust each other. They were not just astronauts anymore. They were a family. As they flew closer to Mars, the red planet grew bigger in the window. They could see its rocky surface and dust storms swirling in the air. It was both beautiful and scary. But this was just the beginning of their adventure. They had come so far, and there was still so much more to explore. What would they find on Mars? Would they discover new life? Or would something unexpected happen? The team knew one thing for sure. This mission was the most important thing they had ever done. And they were ready for whatever came next. The space mission, a mission to explore space. The red planet, Mars, grew larger in the spaceship window as the team of astronauts approached. They were filled with excitement and a bit of nervousness. No human had ever set foot on Mars before, and they were about to make history. Captain John, Maria, Tom, and Emma looked at each other, their hearts beating faster. They had trained for this moment for years, but nothing could truly prepare them for what they were about to do. "Prepare for landing," Captain John said calmly, though everyone could hear the excitement in his voice. Tom worked quickly to make sure the landing system was ready. Maria double-checked the calculations for their descent. The ship began to slow down as it entered Mars' thin atmosphere. Unlike Earth, Mars didn't have thick clouds or much air to slow them down, so they had to be extra careful. As the ship descended, dust from Mars' surface swirled around them. The red rocks and mountains below looked harsh and alien. The spacecraft shook slightly, but Captain John kept his hands steady on the controls. The ship made a soft thud as it landed on the rocky ground of Mars. For a moment, there was complete silence. The astronauts all looked at each other, and then a huge cheer erupted inside the ship. "We did it! We're on Mars!" shouted Tom, his face lighting up with joy. Captain John smiled, but reminded everyone the real work starts now. The astronauts quickly began preparing for their first steps on Mars. They had to wear their spacesuits because Mars had no air that humans could breathe. The suits were heavy and made walking a bit difficult, but they protected the astronauts from the cold and lack of oxygen. One by one, they climbed down the ladder of the spaceship. Captain John was the first to set foot on Mars. He looked around at the empty, quiet planet, took a deep breath, and said, "For all of humanity, we take this step forward." His voice echoed in their headsets, and it felt like the whole world was watching through their cameras. Maria followed, then Tom, and finally Emma. They stood together on the surface of Mars, looking at the vast red desert in front of them. The sky was pinkish, and the ground was covered in rocks and dust. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Their first task was to set up a small base near the spaceship. They had brought special tents and equipment that would allow them to live and work on Mars for a few days. The astronauts worked together, setting up the base and making sure everything was running smoothly. It was hard work, but they didn't mind. They were too excited to be on another planet. Maria, being a scientist, was eager to start exploring. She wanted to collect samples of the rocks and soil to study back on Earth. There might be signs of life in these rocks, she said. Even if it's just small bacteria, it would be a huge discovery. She walked around the base, carefully picking up rocks and placing them in special containers. The red soil of Mars was dry and dusty, and the ground was hard beneath her feet. Every step left a deep footprint, a reminder that humans had finally arrived. Meanwhile, Tom was busy checking the spaceship and the equipment. Even though they had landed safely, he wanted to make sure everything was in perfect condition. "We're a long way from home," he said, "and we can't afford any mistakes." Emma, the doctor, was making sure everyone was healthy. Space travel was tough on the body, and being on Mars brought new challenges. The lower gravity made their muscles work differently, and the cold could be dangerous. But so far, everyone was doing well. As the first day on Mars came to an end, the astronauts gathered inside their base to rest. Outside, the sun was setting, and the sky turned dark, revealing millions of stars. It was beautiful, but also a little scary. Mars was far from Earth, and they were alone on this strange planet. "I wonder if there's life out there," Emma said quietly as she looked up at the stars. "We might be the only living things for millions of miles," Maria replied. "But maybe one day we'll find something." The next day, the real adventure began. The team had a plan to explore a nearby canyon that looked interesting from the photos they had taken from the ship. It was a long walk, and they had to be careful. As they walked, Maria kept scanning the area with her equipment. She was looking for anything unusual, something that might show signs of life. The others helped her, checking the rocks and soil as they moved. Suddenly, Maria stopped. Her scanner was picking up something strange. "Come look at this," she called to the others. They all gathered around as Maria pointed to a small rock. It looked like an ordinary rock at first, but when she turned it over, there were tiny marks on it. "These patterns, they don't look natural," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Could it be life?" Tom asked, staring at the rock. "I don't know," Maria said, "but we need to take this back to the ship and study it closely." They carefully collected the rock and continued exploring. As they moved deeper into the canyon, they found more strange rocks with similar patterns. The team was buzzing with excitement. Could this be the proof they had been looking for? But just as they were about to head back to the base, the ground shook beneath them. A small tremor caused the rocks around them to shift. "Earthquake?" Captain John asked, surprised. "Marsquake," Maria corrected. "Mars has quakes too, but they're usually small." The tremor wasn't strong, but it reminded them that Mars was an unpredictable planet. They quickly made their way back to the base, carrying the rocks they had found. Once inside, Maria began to study the samples. Hours passed as the team watched Maria work. She used special tools to examine the patterns on the rocks, and the more she looked, the more convinced she became. I think we've found signs of life," she finally said. Everyone stared at her in shock. "Are you sure?" Captain John asked. "It's not life as we know it," Maria said. "It's tiny, microscopic life, maybe millions of years old. But it's life." The room was silent as the astronauts realized what this meant. They had just made one of the biggest discoveries in human history. Life existed beyond Earth. Even though it was small and ancient, it was still life. "This changes everything," Tom said quietly. Captain John nodded. "We've just taken the first step toward understanding the universe." The next few days were filled with excitement as they continued studying the samples and sending information back to Earth. The whole world was watching, and everyone was amazed by their discovery. As their time on Mars came to an end, the team prepared to leave the Red Planet. They packed up their base and carefully stored all the samples they had collected as they climbed back into the spaceship. "We're leaving Mars," Captain John said, "but we'll be back." The spaceship lifted off, leaving behind the red dust of Mars as they flew back toward the stars. The journey home would be long, but the astronauts were filled with pride. They had explored a new world, faced challenges, and discovered something amazing. As they looked out at the stars, they knew that this was just the beginning. There were many more planets to explore, many more mysteries to solve. The universe was vast, and they were ready for the next adventure. The end.